Hello, this is Candy with eyes2jesus.blogspot.com, and here we are continuing on with our study, going through the whole book of Revelation, and we are already up to Revelation chapter 15. Now, chapter 15 is a pretty short chapter. There's only 8 verses, but the amount of content and information contained in those 8 verses is phenomenal. So let's get into this short but very important chapter. So please turn in your King James Bible to Revelation chapter 15, and please follow along. In fact, this study, there's going to be one part where we're going to be flipping to the Old Testament, then directly to the New Testament without a break in reading, where it's going to be helpful and less confusing to you if you do follow along. So I do encourage you to get out your King James Bible and follow along if that is not already your habit. So beginning in chapter 15, verse 1, it says, "And I saw another sign in heaven." Stop there. This is a time cue to us, the readers, to help realign us to where we're at, what we're getting into time-wise in the book of Revelation. Okay, where did we last see sign in heaven in Revelation? Revelation chapter 12. And what was happening in Revelation chapter 12? Revelation chapter 12 wrapped up the 7th trumpet. Okay? And then the 7 vials of wrath can't happen until the 7 trumpets are over. And then chapters 13 and 14 zoomed in on some specific things happening, especially surrounding the abomination of desolation, and after that, in the middle of the tribulation. Okay, so now chapter 15, it is giving us a clue. When it says, "And I saw another sign in heaven," it's recalling us back to chapter 12, where when we saw those signs in heaven, then we knew that, okay, that was in the end of the 7th trumpet. Now we're being called to another sign in heaven. So now we are picking up chronologically after the 7th trumpet. And we are getting ready to head into the second 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation. And chapter 15 is, you could say, the introduction to that in a sense. So now let's read all of verse 1, and it says, "And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous. 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God." He's seeing the sign in heaven being the 7 angels receiving the 7 plagues. And these 7 last plagues, these are the 7 vials of wrath, as we clearly gather as we continue reading in this chapter. All right, continuing on with verse 2, it says, "And I saw as it were," so that means he's not literally, what he saw isn't literally this, but it looks like this, as it were. "And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God." Who are these people that are standing on this stuff that looks like a sea of glass, who has the harps of God? Well, these are post-middle tribulation, or post-middle rapture Christians who got saved after the middle tribulation rapture. And how did they overcome the beast? Whether it be the name, the number, worshiping, etc. How did they overcome the beast? They overcame him by death. That they were willing to follow Jesus Christ even unto death. Because as we have read, if you don't partake of the beast at this point, then it is a death penalty. And these are Christians. They have their faith in God so strong that even though the delusion was extremely intense by this point in the tribulation, they stayed strong in Christ. So they overcame the beast by being martyred for Jesus Christ. And these martyrs have harps. Now, we also see other instances of harps being used in worship, in heavenly worship. We saw early in Revelation, for example, the 24 elders playing harps and worshiping God as well. So that's what these martyrs are doing. And what do these martyrs sing? Well, verse 3, we're going to look at the first half of verse 3. It says, "And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying." So it sounds like they're combining the Song of Moses and then blending that into the Song of the Lamb, which is so symbolic of bridging together the two covenants anyways, which is really cool. Okay, so which Song of Moses is this referring to? The one in Exodus chapter 15 or the one in Deuteronomy chapter 32? Well, in Deuteronomy, they're taking the promised land. They're moving into the land that God promised them. So it seems to be more appropriate that this would be referring to the Deuteronomy chapter 32 Song of Moses. That's a very, very long song in its entirety, but if you read just the first 6 verses of that song, it overviews the whole song and seems entirely relevant to this point in the tribulation and with the Song of the Lamb, which we see the Song of the Lamb laid out in the second half of verse 3 and all of verse 4. So we're going to do something here. Go ahead and keep your finger so you can keep your place here at Revelation chapter 15. But I want you to also turn to Deuteronomy chapter 32. So turn to Deuteronomy chapter 32, but keep your place here at Revelation 15. So at Deuteronomy chapter 32, we're going to read verses 1 through 6 of the Song of Moses. And then, without stopping, we are going to then switch over right after we're done reading the 6th verse and go directly into reading the Song of the Lamb, where we left off in Revelation 15. Listen to these two together. And this is what I think is quite possibly the song that these martyrs are singing at this point during the tribulation up in heaven. All right, so Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 1 through 6 begin, and it says, "Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak. And hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. My doctrine shall drop as the rain. My speech shall distill as the dew, as a small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass. Because I will publish the name of the Lord. Ascribe ye greatness unto our God. He is the rock, capital R. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, a God of truth. And without iniquity, just and right is he. They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are a perverse and crooked generation. Do ye thus requite the Lord, O foolish people and unwise? Is not he thy father that hath bought thee or purchased thee? Hath he not made thee and established thee? Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For thou only art holy, and all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest. See how Deuteronomy 32, verses 1 through 6, blend perfectly right into the Song of the Lamb, which is in the second half of verse 3 and all of verse 4. That is amazing. So it is my belief that those are the words that are being sung by these martyrs who were martyred because they wouldn't worship or partake of the beast. In my opinion, those were the words that were probably being sung, that will be sung at this point in the future in heaven. All right, now notice at the end of the Song of the Lamb here in verse 4, it says that all nations shall come and worship before thee. And later on in the book of Revelation, it describes that event happening. So we will get into that and what that means and what that is going to look like. Meanwhile, let's continue on with verse 5. And after that, so after that song, I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. Now, let me just reiterate something. I don't know if I've really gone into this very deeply in our previous studies, but the tabernacle or the temple, the Jewish tabernacle or temple that God gave specific instructions on how to build to the Israelites in the Old Testament, that is a small-scale model of the tabernacle or temple in heaven itself, where God dwells. So that to me is amazing. So you want to know a bit more about what heaven looks like? Well, you can get more of an understanding of what the tabernacle or temple looks like that God dwells in heaven by studying the dimensions and the building and the instructions to the Israelites in the Old Testament and how they were to build a small-scale model, an earthly model of the tabernacle or temple that they were to worship God in. All right, so this tabernacle in heaven at this point is opened. Now look at verse 6. And the 7 angels, these are the 7 angels that were seen as a sign in heaven, and the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure and white linen, and having their breasts girded with golden girdles. And one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials, full of the wrath of God, who liveth forever and ever. This is interesting because it seems like in this chapter the 7 vials of wrath is being used interchangeably with the 7 plagues of God, but we have a distinction here. Look at this. In verse 6, the 7 angels came out of the temple having the 7 plagues, but then in verse 7, one of the cherubim or Zoa, the 4 beasts that we see throughout Revelation, one of them gives unto the 7 angels the 7 golden vials full of wrath. Now, there is probably something in there that possibly no one has even seen yet. Something that possibly further eschatological study will bring to bear that could be absolutely amazing. Now, how does that differentiate from the first half of the tribulation? Well, the first half of the tribulation was child's play compared to the second half. This is how Christians are saved from the wrath of God. We are raptured at the 7th trumpet before the second half of the tribulation. The 7 vials of God's wrath are poured forth. That's why we are not unto wrath. Okay, but the 7 vials of wrath are plagues, meaning these are judgments by God. Okay, the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets, a lot of them were largely political disasters, natural disasters, I should say, and even astronomical, literally astronomical disasters, with a planet, a brown dwarf planet-like thing from outer space swinging around on its very large elliptical orbit, going pretty close to the Earth. And that caused a lot of the seals and trumpets. So the first half of the tribulation, God saw those things coming, but he let them happen instead of protecting the earth from them, as he has protected us in the past from many astronomical disasters, near misses with very large asteroids, and who knows what else, right? Specific forms of radiation that we may not have even discovered yet, etc. But in the first half of the tribulation, he lets these things happen. But if you've been following with me in this study, you see that the Christians who have the seal of God on their forehead, and that doesn't just include the 144,000, as we have studied, that includes all saved, born-again Christians, receive a measure of protection. All right, so the 7 vials of wrath, these are going to be purposely, by God, his judgment on a fallen, sinful world. So what did we read? One of the big things, most important things, what did we read about in chapter 14? We read that God sent an angel to proclaim the gospel to the whole world. So before God unleashes his 7 vials of wrath, plague, judgment, everybody on the world would have heard the gospel from the mouth of an angel. So they've been fully warned. They've been given the gospel. And it is my belief that anyone who did choose to believe and receive that gospel from the mouth of that angel at that time will receive a measure of protection from these 7 vials of wrath. There seem to be hints and inklings of that as we read about some of these 7 vials of wrath later on in the book of Revelation. All right, now verse 8 says, "And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. Can you grasp the time of that? Think about that. That means for 3.5 years straight, no man can enter into the temple of God in heaven. Not until the tribulation is finished and all 7 vials of wrath have been emptied upon the earth. Now notice it says no man was able to enter. Okay, well, no man here, I looked this up in the Greek, and that's oudeis. And oudeis, interestingly, means no man, no woman, no child, no thing. And I love that because that tells me that men were allowed, and I mean men, women, children, we were allowed access to the temple of God in heaven. And we are allowed, I believe, access to the Holy of Holies because the veil in the earthly model that blocked man's view and blocked man's way from going to the Holy of Holies where God dwells, that veil was torn at Christ's sacrifice on the cross. You can read about that in the Gospels, giving man direct access to God. Right now we walk by faith and not by sight. But then when we are in heaven and we have access to that temple or tabernacle of God, we will have access to the Holy of Holies, and then we will walk also by sight. So you notice here it's saying that the no man, which is oudeis, which means no man, no woman, no child, no thing, nobody and nothing can enter the temple of God for the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. Why? Because the glory of God fills the temple for those whole 3.5 years, while the 7 vials of wrath are unleashed upon the earth. Have a blessed day.